I feel very humbled to be here and to look around and see all the number of people that were helped by Tom and have perhaps a lot more to do with Tom personally than I did. But what gets to me about this whole story of Tom, such a remarkable man, and yet he never received the recognition that he should have received. And they had an inquiry in 1974 in regards to chiropractors and chiropractors, and as a result of that inquiry, it was decided there should be a registration board because, as you know, the Whitlam government had introduced the medical benefits, and of course those people who required medical benefits from working with physiotherapists and chiropractors and osteopaths couldn't receive it unless they went through this registration board. So they set up this registration board, and it was made up entirely of chiropractors and chiropractors that had been trained in America mainly, in England, and it was a bit of a boys' club to a certain extent. But Professor Webb, who carried out the investigation, said that there should be allowance for people who have been in practice in this field and had been in practice for 10 years, that they should be accepted and be registered. And so the government introduced legislation to allow for the registration of all chiropractors and osteopaths. But unfortunately in Victoria, for some reason or other, they left there what's known as the grandfather clause, this important clause that allowed those practitioners with no official qualification to become registered, Tom Bowen being one of these. So the Labor Party at the time, of which I was a member, and following representations from Tom and other people, we went to the government and said, look, you need to alter this legislation and put in this grandfather clause, and the government for some reason or other didn't feel inclined to. So in 1980 we introduced a private members bill asking that this grandfather clause be inserted, and like a lot of private members bills in the parliament, if they're brought in by the opposition, the government just ignores them, puts them to one side. But within 12 months of us putting the private members bill, all of a sudden the government have a bill exactly as we wanted, but they wanted to take the credit for it. And then it was this grandfather clause which allowed practitioners who had been practicing for 10 years successfully to be registered, and then therefore their patients be entitled. And of course Tom was very pleased that this opportunity was given him. But the board were very unwilling to let practitioners like Tom and others to be registered. I don't know whether it was professional jealousy or what. And so instead of carrying out the spirit of the law, they introduced this assessment that had to be done. And when Tom went to be registered, he found he had to have knowledge of something like 32 different medical books, and he had to carry out demonstrations on live patients with nothing wrong with them, and the whole thing was pretty farcical. And what really annoyed me and a lot of other people at the time was that when you pass legislation, there's two things about legislation. It's the law itself, but there's also the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law was that people like Tom, who obviously were so successful and their patients were being treated at over 80% success rate, they shouldn't have to pass this. But the board made it so hard that people like Tom were unable to do it, and it was against the spirit of the law, and that's what made me and a lot of people very angry. And as a consequence of that battling, Tom could never get that registration. But the thing was, as you all know, Tom, it wasn't him. He was still getting the number of patients. It wasn't affecting his living. He was thinking of these patients. They couldn't get their medical benefits because this board would fail to recognise his qualification. So it was one of the tragedies, I think, and Tom really was more concerned about knew his patients than he was about himself. But what I think today, and what we notice, that we fail to recognise the natural ability and the natural talents that some people are born with. Right through history there's recordings of people who have been born with talents and the ability to do things even though they have no academic qualifications. And right through history you'll find recorded history records that not in tribes and communities, but there's always been someone who's had the ability to reset bones and work with people and cure people. They just have a natural ability, and that's been known throughout history, and Tom was one of these very rare people. When I was a young man of 18 and playing football, before there were any physiotherapists or chiropractors or anybody for that matter, there were three that I remember in Geelong. There were three people in Geelong. There was Tom Bowen, a fellow called Mr Malin who lived in Summer Street, Belmont, and another one, Callender. And if you had a football injury or any problems at all with back problems, you went to one of those three in Geelong, mainly to Tom. And they were able to, as I said, to be able to carry out these cures. This is before there was any what you call qualified people operating in. So what I'd like to just say today, and to thank Shirley for what she's done, to see that this proper recognition is given to Tom, because looking back now I always regret the fact we didn't think of it at the time. We should have ensured that he had an Order of Australia for his work he did for the community. I've got an Order of Australia, but it pales in I got it for helping the community of Geelong, but it pales in the significance what I did for the work that Tom did. I had investigated the possibility of a posthumous Order of Australia award, but apparently that's not possible, but it's just a shame. And I just think it's ironical now that some of those people who didn't think Tom was good enough to be registered are quite happy now to put the Bowen technique on their brass plates. And it's rather, I know I have a bit of a smile to myself, and I suppose Tom has a bit of a wry smile himself. But Shirley, you've done a wonderful job to record this, and I congratulate you on what you've done, and I thank everybody here for coming along to help us celebrate the birthday of this marvellous man. Thank you very much.